Welcome to the TIF podcast. This is episode 7, and in today's episode we'll certainly be reviewing the Champions League results, some shock results in there that we will be talking about, and we'll be briefly talking about the punishment Mauricio Pochettino has received from the FA from his offence and during the Burnley game, or after the Burnley game I should say. So let's just talk about the Champions League results first. So massive shock result, really. The first one of the week was in regards to Ajax and Real Madrid. So we obviously know that Ajax ended up being 4-1 winners on the night, and this was during a second leg of that Champions League tie. In aggregate, they ended up winning 5-3. So of course Ajax went and scored 4 away goals. What a fantastic result for them, in my opinion. This was absolutely unexpected. So if you do remember in the previous episode that we did speak about Sergio Ramos deliberately getting a yellow card in order for him to miss the second leg against Ajax, he assumed this would have been a walk in the park, but of course that wasn't the situation. Ajax turned up to the races and they ended up beating them 4-1 on the night. But absolutely fantastic. Real Madrid, as we all know, are the 3-time champions, really back-to-back champions, and on the night they were absolutely blown away. Ajax turned up. They've got an absolutely young team. So on the night we had Ziyech as the scorer, Neres, Tadic, who absolutely run the show in my opinion, as well as shown. And of course Real Madrid's sole goal scorer was Asensio, who's the young player within the team, of course, young and up and coming. He ended up getting on the score sheet as well later on in that particular game. But to say that Real Madrid were extremely unlucky, that will be an absolute understatement. Ajax absolutely outplayed them, and to me this generally just proves that coaching and culture definitely plays a huge part within football. Money is in absolutely everything. Ajax aren't big spenders. I do believe that they've got a wage budget less than West Brom's, and West Brom play in the Championship, which is the second tier of English football. So it does prove that money is in everything. Culture and coaching play a massive part. They've got a young captain in the form of Delete as well, and he was absolutely outstanding on the night. Obviously this result, as I said, came as a shock, as well as the other results that we will be talking about shortly, but it's left the Champions League completely open this season. Anyone can win it. So Real Madrid was certainly used to going out and actually winning the Champions League for the last 3 seasons, of course, but it looks like that golden generation is finally coming to an end. Their dominance within Europe is coming to an end. We saw this in previous years really with Barcelona, where they were extremely dominant throughout their domestic league as well as in Europe. But with Real Madrid, it's absolutely come to an end. Solari, his time is certainly actually numbered, or his days are numbered at Real Madrid. Apparently the fans have put to a vote, or they do have the opportunity to vote who they wanted to take over as manager, as well as the fact that what players they want to be sold from that particular team. So very bad news for Real Madrid. Gareth Bale didn't receive a fantastic reception from his own fans as well. He had an extremely tough time, and I do believe that his time in Spain may certainly come to an end this summer. But of course these things happen. Football is football. You get shock results pretty much constantly. So the other result, which we are going to talk about briefly, will be Dortmund versus Tottenham. So Tottenham ended up winning 4-0 on aggregate. They won 1-0 on the night, courtesy of a Harry Kane goal as usual. Pretty much if they didn't have Harry Kane, I don't know what they would absolutely do, but he ended up being a comfortable 2-leg win for them. So they progress into the last 8 as well. Not too much to discuss on that particular game. Of course, it seemed as if it was an extremely easy game. Just one pointer really is they didn't concede any goals throughout the 2 legs. So good for them, and as I said, they will definitely progress into the last round of 8. So another shock result from Wednesday's games. It was Porto 3, Roma 1. So initially, really, you would have thought that Roma would have progressed into the last 8. Porto, we do know they are winners in recent years, I should say, under Jose Mourinho, and basically they are on course to yet again get themselves into the latter stages of the Champions League. So they are through to the last 8 as it stands, but they ended up winning 3-1 on the night, and this was obviously during the second leg. During the first leg, they'd lost 2-1 to Roma, and you would have thought Roma would have actually gone ahead and actually taken this whole tie and progressed into the last 8. But of course, Porto had different ideas. On the day, Suarez scored. Marega, Telles, he ended up getting an extra time penalty, so the tie ended up getting into extra time. Porto ended up winning 4-3 on aggregate, but you would have thought Roma would have progressed in this particular tie. But of course, again, as I said, this leaves the whole Champions League absolutely blown open. So we'll discuss the next fixture after this ad break, and I'll see you shortly. So, I love creating content in general. As you may all know, I've recently started this TIF podcast. Have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? When I was trying to get this podcast off the ground, I had a lot of questions. How do I record an episode? How do I get my show into all the apps people like to listen? How do I make money from a podcast? Which is one of the key questions people tend to ask themselves before they take the plunge to actually starting a podcast. The answer to every one of these questions is really simple. Anchor. Anchor is a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing your podcast. Best of all, it's 100% free and it's ridiculously easy to use. And now Anchor can match you with great sponsors who want to advertise on your podcast. That means you can get paid to podcast right away. In fact, that's what I'm doing right now by reading this. Basically, I love using Anchor. It's an extremely easy app to use. First of all you need to do is just download the app either on iOS or Android. I personally use it on Android. Register, which takes literally less than 1 minute. Once you've registered, you are ready to go. All you need to do is set up your profile and hit the record button. You've got multiple resources available to you in the form of background music, jingles, etc. You name it. So if you always wanted to start a podcast, make money doing it, go to anchor.fm/start to join me and the diverse community of podcasters already using Anchor. That's anchor.fm/start. I can't wait to hear your podcast. Welcome back to the TIF podcast. This is part 2 of episode 7. So of course, as mentioned, we'll be talking about the other 2 Champions League fixtures that took place during this week. So we've already discussed Porto, Roma, Tottenham, Dortmund, as well as the actual Real Madrid and Ajax game. So the only game left to discuss here would be the Manchester United PSG game. So of course, massive shock result. Going into this game, really, Man United were 2-0 down, and these were 2 away goals that were scored by PSG. Obviously, the score ended up being 3-3 on aggregate, but it's only because Man United went ahead and scored 3 away goals. Not gonna lie, fantastic job that Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is doing at Man United. Is he gonna get given the job on a full-time basis? I'm not too sure. But Man United went early, took the lead very early on, and this was courtesy of Lukaku. So he scored only 2 minutes in. Paris Saint-Germain then ended up getting an equaliser only 12 minutes into the game. But from that particular moment, Man United were in extreme control of the game. Lukaku got his second within 30 minutes. And then the final goal came controversially, courtesy of Marcus Rashford, in the form of a penalty. So the ref went and reviewed it over at the VAR. In my personal opinion, it didn't look like a penalty whatsoever. Basically, the player weren't even looking at the ball, in my opinion. Man United player took a shot, and the guy turned his back. Of course, they always say, make sure you're facing the ball. Never take your eye off the ball. And I guess so on this occasion, Kimpembe was punished for this particular action. But Man United ended up getting a last-minute penalty. They scored that penalty, which saw them going into the last 8 of the Champions League. No one gave them a chance whatsoever. If I was a betting man, I wouldn't have put my money on Man United. So, of course, we do know that PSG have got an illustrious list of players, but their key man, Neymar, was out. He was watching from the sidelines. However, they still had the likes of Mbappe on the pitch, and none of them could conjure up absolutely anything last night. It was a difficult night for them. Of course, Thomas Tuchel, he's obviously failed to do what the PSG owners want, which is to win the Champions League. They spent so much money, including a world record transfer fee on Neymar, but they haven't managed to win the Champions League. The same would apply at Man City, but I do believe the pressure is slightly a little bit more at PSG. If you look at the amount they've actually invested into the team over the years, they want that Champions League trophy, and that is the last thing they want to get their hands on. But of course, Man United ended up coming up trumps. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer has done a massive job over there, and of course, we wish them all the best in terms of their progression in the competition itself, but we won't wish them too much luck, of course. But yeah, great result for them, of course. So let's just talk about the final story, which we said we will be talking about within this particular episode. We'll be talking about Mauricio Pochettino's punishment from the FA. So if you do remember, he went and squared up to Mike Dean after their defeat at Burnley, and essentially you would have expected that punishment to come a little bit sooner, but it's been a week and a bit really until we actually had any news on this. And there's this whole agenda of Tottenham being favoured by the FA, or the FA being slightly lenient with Tottenham. So we've seen previous managers commit lesser offences, in my opinion, and they've received 3 match bans, etc. And on this occasion, Pochettino has received a 2-match ban, as well as a £10,000 fine, which is not a lot of money, which I do believe his club will just lump up and they'll pay for him. But it's getting a little bit ridiculous, in my opinion. The FA seem to be extremely lenient. I do believe Unai Emery earlier on in the season kicked a bottle, wasn't aimed at anyone whatsoever. He received a hefty fine, and I do believe there was a touchline ban of some sort in place. But of course, with Pochettino on this occasion, he was shouting in the ref's face. He was essentially confronting the ref at the end of the game, and it was absolutely ridiculous, not professional whatsoever. And you would have expected the punishment to be slightly a little bit more heftier than what it was. And one of the key things really I want to discuss, really, of course we all know that I'm an Arsenal fan, but why did this punishment come after the Arsenal game? Any other manager, they would have actually implemented the punishment straight away. It was on video, it was on camera. There was nothing really to discuss, really, for them to take a week to come back and actually give us the result in regards to this situation. But of course, this is the FA in Tottenham that we're talking about. If it was a Jose Mourinho and Arsene Wenger, they would have been punished straight away. They would have received a 3 or 4 match touchline ban, and that would have been that. But that's the final story we have to discuss today. As usual, thank you so much for listening to. If you are listening to whatever platform you're listening to, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Make sure that you leave us a review. Thank you so much for listening to the This Is Football podcast. And it's your boy TC, and I'm out.